Imposter syndrome is my indicator that I'm doing it right. The imposter syndrome keeps you at the edge of learning. Differentiating values and then connecting to those values is the key to not burning out. Adaptability requires a degree of humility because you have to be able to let go of what doesn't work anymore. I fundamentally believe that workplaces can be a place where people go home happier than when they arrive.
Hello and welcome to the Success Differently podcast. My name is Michelle Sorgaroli and I'm joined today by Neil Pretty. I'm so excited about this conversation. Now, Neil is the co-founder and CEO of Aristotle Performance, a company that specializes in working with organizations to unlock the potential of their people and their teams. Neil has also been recognized on the list of Vancouver's top 100 innovators, which is kind of no surprise because this is, I think, Neil's seventh business venture. So he's not a guy who sits still. He's a serial entrepreneur, always into something, keeps him interesting. Now, this is really curious. Neil's interest in leadership, which is where he's finding himself a little bit now, interest in leadership was really ignited as an Army cadet. As an Army cadet leader. And I think you were starting there at 13, and then you were in the platoon commander by the time you were 15, I think is right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then from there, you had lots of opportunities to lead and lots of different entrepreneurial ventures, including an arborist and a ski boot fitter and a bunch of other fun little adventure things. And then we find ourselves here. So when what I'm thinking is by the time what I read somewhere is by the time you were in your early 30s, you realized you had already led more than 300 teams, which is unbelievable. It's so remarkable, which probably has a lot to do with why you're in leadership today. We're going to get more into that. But I think that I'm just really curious about that's phenomenal. The other thing is that I thought was interesting, I read again somewhere, you said that there is no natural high that is higher than a high performance environment. And
Hmm.
I just love that. So really speaking to you, who you are as a leader, I'm excited about that, Neil, and getting into that. Neil leads a life of curiosity and he actively seeks both adventure and adrenaline, which shouldn't be any surprise knowing what we know about him already. and, and he's on a mission to create exponential impact for both organizations and the people who work for them. So
Wow.
I'm so delighted and I'm so excited about where this conversation is going to go. Thank you, Neil, for joining us today.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much for that very gracious introduction. I mean, I have to admit, I'm kind of floored. It's like, wow, all that stuff. You kind of just go through it and you face yourself and you face your challenges and like I have a very weird relationship with my imposter syndrome because
Oh, yeah.
it's like a life of being at the edge of it.
Can you tell, what do you mean by that when you say a weird relationship where you're living at the edge of it? I'd love you to dig into that a little further.
Yeah, so my imposter syndrome is my indicator that I'm doing it right.
Nice. I love
And when
that.
I work with clients on imposter syndrome, I first they say, "Oh, I'm sort of having imposter syndrome, and I don't want to work on it." And I go, "Great! I'm so glad you're not a narcissistic sociopath." So that's helpful, and
Yeah,
that's the first step is like realizing that it's a pro-social behavior,
right. Yeah.
and
It's that probably I'm imagining that imposter syndrome, like I like to say, if you're in a place of you're scared and you're excited at the same time.
totally,
Yeah, that's kind of where
yeah,
imposter syndrome sort of hangs out a little bit.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And I would imagine that probably has a lot to do with, in your experience of leadership, I know psychological safety and that whole piece. Where does imposter syndrome and psychological safety kind of how do they play together?
How do they play together? I think um, that's a really good question. I don't know if I have a single answer
Okay.
or sort of a multiple of perspectives to offer on it. So, an individual's own capacity to feel safe. I
Mm,
think, we often refer to ghosts of leadership past and your past experiences and what you believe about yourself and what you believe will happen
mhm,
is based on your history. And I think, the imposter syndrome is this perspective on yourself and how you should be behaving or not be behaving.
mm,
And psychological safety is an assessment of your environment to which you choose the behavior. So it's like Psych safety is an assessment, and then imposter syndrome was like a filter, is
Mm.
sort of the way I like to see it. And I think that the imposter syndrome itself isn't wholly bad. Much like impression management isn't totally bad. It's a necessity so that we can work well together. But there comes a point where it now has if we're overexpressing it, it now has a negative effect.
What?
And
Yeah, thank
yeah,
you. That can I ask on that? Is that
sure,
okay?
of course.
Thank you. How do you know, like when it's productive,
Hmm.
and then when it starts to tip over into unproductive or unhelpful, this imposter syndrome? Like how,
I was listening to a podcast with Adam Grant the other day where he said when he was writing his book, Think Again, he wanted to write a chapter on overthinking, but he didn't feel like he quite had enough of the right content to get in the book by time of publishing. And what he said in the podcast was, if you're thinking about the same thing for more than 10 minutes, you're probably overthinking it. And I think that's kind of maybe not 10 minutes, but there is some sort of boundary that is
Mm,
it is dominating your thoughts and progress is being pushed to the side. And when it comes to psychological safety, you need to manage your impression to some degree so that you can work together with others. But the problem is that if you're overexpressing it, if you're thinking too much about how you should say something or what you should say or who you should talk to first and all, worrying about the consequences, if you're investing calories and thinking about that,
right.
you're not investing that precious brain power on
Hmm.
much more productive challenges.
Hmm.
So I think that's where the boundary is. Is this now an overthinking scenario, or is this an awareness, uh,
Yeah.
uh,
I,
uh, signal? Is this an awareness piece so that I can make the best progress forward? Like the
right.
imposter syndrome, for me, there was huge learning that came because I listened to it.
When did you become aware of that? Like, is there a time in your life, a specific time where you started to become more aware of the influence of imposter syndrome that's influencing how you think today?
I'm giggling because I think probably learned about that term around the same time that I learned what an entrepreneur was.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know what that was until about maybe, I don't know, call it 2017 or 2018 when I learned
Okay.
who Gary Vaynerchuk was.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
It's like,
Beautiful.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I just thought it's what you did.
Yep.
I traveled all over North America, often working with four teams in the morning and then four teams at night or five teams. I'm like leading multiple teams all the time, working with an in contact team as we traveled all over North America together and like lots of different team contexts, lots of different team scenarios. And I made a ton of mistakes, so many, so many, so many mistakes. Oh my God.
Mm.
But never with a name to it. Just a feeling of like, I'm not good enough. I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay.
And you kind of just get this understanding. And it's funny because my wife and I were talking about this last night with my daughter, who's 9. And do you know who Julia Childs is?
Yep, I do.
Right, right. So in her French cooking book, or in her one of her cookbooks, I shouldn't say the Joy of Cooking, but in one of her cookbooks, she has a recipe for um, Yorkshire pudding.
Yep.
And the
I think
secret
my
to
mom made that recipe growing
right,
up.
right, and I mean, right,
Yep.
amazing. So we save the duck fat from our Christmas dinner every year, and then in January, we have this Yorkshire
Oh.
pudding. And the secret to the recipe isn't the ingredients; it's one phrase: pour confidently.
Hmm.
And the key to good Yorkshire pudding is to pour confidently. And I think the key to overcoming the imposter syndrome in a lot of my life and a lot of these scenarios is if you don't pour confidently, if you don't go forward as though you should be there, you'll never fully understand your potential. And you will screw it up. Same with like skiing, mountain biking, rock climbing. If you ski and you get scared, the initial reaction is to pull back. But what it does is removes weight from the edges of your skis.
Yeah.
So you lose traction because of your fear. So
Right.
you have to lean into the fear. to gain
Hmm.
the traction you need to be successful. So it doesn't matter whether you think you have the skills or not. There comes a point where you have to lean in to such a degree that you gain traction. And that has really ultimately been the stance that I've taken in most of my endeavors is if I don't know, I might as well go in full confidence because if I don't, I know I'm going to lose out. And
Nice.
what it's done is made me very comfortable with being wrong and
Mm.
the tolerance to difference and your capacity to be wrong without being wrong as a human being
Yeah.
is directly correlated to your capacity to learn. So
Yeah.
that like confidence to lean in with that, come whatever may, that to me that's the game of learning and that's the number one, of all the experiences, the number one thing that I think I enjoy and I love doing and scares me the most, but is the most important is learning, which is
Hmm.
really what, the imposter syndrome keeps you at the edge of learning.
Beautiful phrase. The imposter syndrome keeps you at the edge of learning. Nicely said. And leaning into it, good examples as an adventurer and an adrenaline seeker. Now, are those related to your discoveries about being an entrepreneur, or is this just how does that work?
I mean,
Are you just leaning into fear every day, or?
I did not think I was an adrenaline junkie
Ah,
because, I got to watch the birth of the North Shore mountain biking scene, for example. As a young kid, I got to watch these heroes do crazy things, and I'm not doing that. So I didn't think that that's what, I was looking at them, and that was my benchmark.
right.
But compared to the average bear, yeah, I'm definitely an adrenaline junkie. It's like, but there's definitely a 0.5% of the population that's crazier than I am,
Only
you
half,
know,
though.
right?
Half a
Or
percent.
1% or whatever it is. And it's like there's a percent of the population that's crazier than I am, but that doesn't mean that that isn't like a motivating factor for me. And for me, the adrenaline is the juice. Like I want to be in rooms where I'm a little bit scared and I want to have to force myself to do it
Mm,
anyways. It lets me know who I am and what I can do. And if there isn't a chance of failure, it's not going to be that interesting.
nice. So it lets you know who you are and what you can do by
Hmm.
being at the edge of that.
Yeah.
So how does that work when you're talking, you made a comment in a different podcast that I was listening to about resilience.
Mhm.
And how, it's one thing to talk about being, seeking adrenaline. It's one thing to talk about leaning into the front of your skis when you're afraid that you're going to fall.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about that. It's a whole other thing, especially in a team setting or in any kind of environment where we don't feel like it's okay to speak up and we might get rejected,
Mhm.
right? The sense of belonging that we all drive to. How does that how does that serve, and how do you overcome that sense of resistance, if you will,
Mhm.
so that you can have the resilience on the other side where
Um, as a team leader, my stance is that I'm always able to find what people are capable of before they're able to see it within themselves. And then my goal is to help them achieve that better version.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the secret is really to believe in it before they believe in themselves. And to me, that's
Yeah.
being at the edge of your capability when you don't have someone sort of putting um, challenges in front of yourself. You have to do it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gonna ramp up some adrenaline, because you have to be on point. If you're gonna be at the edge of your capability,
Yeah.
adrenaline is the thing that provides answers in those moments. And for me, the real challenge has been when to turn that off and how to turn that off without burning out, which has, happened more than once.
What what have you learned? Like how do you, for those who are listening, who are adrenaline junkies like yourself, perhaps, How do you turn it off or know when to turn it off?
If anybody's got any suggestions.
Rather than get burnt out first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I would say one of the things I learned is like physical burnout is very different than mental burnout. I would say that connecting your like a lot of people talk about values, but what they're really talking about is virtue signals. And I think differentiating values and then connecting to those values, things that
And
make your life holistic, is the key to not burning out.
what are, just for clarification, what are virtue signals from your perspective?
So a virtue signal is a public display of ideas or perspectives that others would appreciate, that
Hmm.
make you socially acceptable. So, for example, most company values are virtue signals. Integrity. Okay. Be honest all the time. Is that what you're really doing? Like,
Hmm.
what is integrity? What does it
Hmm.
actually mean?
Hmm.
Are you actually being it? And is it rewarded? It's a really tough one. Community. Can you organize your life and your behaviors around community? Is that really, true, or is that just a virtue signal so that other people will say,
Hmm.
this is the kind of person I want to work with? So virtue signals aren't inherently bad, but when we organize around them, it's critical to understand that most values are virtue signals. Whereas like my number one value is exponential impact. And what that means is I do the math. I would rather work with one person who can
Hmm.
go out and have impact on 10,000 people
Hmm.
than work with, you know, 5,000 people and make more money,
Right.
right?
Right.
So like I can organize my week and my behaviors around that kind of like around that value.
Can I ask a question around that?
Sure.
Exponential impact being that it's your value. What is it about that that's so important for you?
When I first started, it was because it's changed. When I first started, it was like I had this belief that I had at some point in my life been a horrible leader. And, leaders go through periods of time where they don't get it
Mm.
right. And there was a period of time where I didn't get it right, and definitely had a lot to learn and still have a lot to learn. But at that time, I had more to learn, shall we say, and more to learn about myself. And I think the challenge was that I felt like I had a penance to pay.
Mm.
That was my initial formulation of that value, was this feeling like I had to pay for it somehow, earn back that. And then
Hmm.
it evolved over time to a state of realizing that I didn't have a penance. I had an opportunity, and the potential became the thing that I wanted to capitalize on. And the burnout ended when I realized that I didn't have to do it at my own expense. I didn't have to suffer. And I think my generation was told to follow your passion. And something I say often is passion means pain. You
Hmm.
know, passion is Latin for pain. And if you follow your passion, you better be ready to for something to hurt. It's going to cost you somewhere. And that reality was in that penance and that passion were connected. And now passion has converted into purpose. And as a result, I'm able to connect things like going to the gym, eating well. I
Hmm.
stopped drinking alcohol a couple of years ago, not because I had a particular problem with it, but because I was just like, if I really want to be doing this stuff, the better I am to myself, the better I can accomplish this goal. That was like 2 years ago.
That's gorgeous. You've probably heard the expression, your pain is your purpose. Have you
Mm.
heard that before? Yeah, which is, in a sense, what we're saying. You said follow your passion. It's interesting, isn't it, how the passion generally does stem from
Yeah.
pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it,
So
it does. Yeah.
what around your leadership, just speaking, candidly, you said you made mistakes. What was there? I know there wasn't one, but is there a story that comes to mind where your leadership, you didn't show up as the leader that you wanted to be,
Hmm.
that you might like to share with us?
Um, there's no one particular story, but there is a particular time.
Okay.
When I was first sort of uh, a foreman as an arborist, actually a tree climber. This is really going back. This is getting close to 20 years ago. Which I know I don't look that old, but sure enough. And I had come up working with all kinds of colorful characters, ironworkers,
Mm-hmm.
arborists, tree fallers. I had been in Army cadets, and I was in a cadet corps that was particularly rough around the edges, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
and almost got shut down for it. And then I was in this position where I was like given a position that had more ego attached to it,
Mm-hmm.
and the best climbers have a bit of a ego that's unhealthy, and you kind of need it because you're gonna go do like exceptionally dangerous things.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively, I just thought I was better than everybody else, and I made sure people knew it,
Mm.
and that the outcome of that was really realizing that I wasn't.
What did that look like when you realized you weren't?
Exceptionally painful. And I think that's why I have such a degree
Oh,
of empathy for leaders
yeah.
because to learn, you have to be willing to be wrong without making yourself wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I did not have that understanding, and nobody around me really had that depth of understanding to guide me in any kind of way. So it was like, yeah, you're wrong. You're an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
This is the product of your doing. And it was like, oh, okay. So now I have to, not only did I have to um, learn how to lead again, because I had actually had quite a lot of leadership training, and then in cadets and things like that, good stuff. And then I'd managed sports stores and worked in that industry, and actually became a trainer and for managing sports stores
Mm-hmm.
in shops and things like that. And I did all kinds of things where my role as a leader was one that I was successful in. And then this domain fundamentally changed that.
Yeah.
Uh, and not only did I have to relearn how to lead in a way that was more in alignment with my personality and who I wanted to be,
Mm-hmm.
I also had to do some reputation management. And
Mm.
that was really uncomfortable, and I think that taught me a lot, taught me a lot
Mm-hmm.
about myself, taught me a lot about what that journey looks like. And at the end of the day, it just made me a lot more empathetic, um, and able to and willing to slow down a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that just comes with age too. As
Mm-hmm.
much as my younger self hates my older self for saying that, it is, you know,
This is so true.
yeah, like,
Well said.
that
It's like,
can't be the
yes,
case. And it's
I
like,
got this.
it's totally the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Um, so yeah, I think the other side of that was also forgiving myself for being a young man who really
Yeah.
wanted to prove himself. And like,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay that I was that young man who wanted to prove himself and didn't quite get it right all the time. And it's okay, like
Mm-hmm.
nobody is awake at night, you know, thinking about things I said to them,
Yeah. Yeah,
At least I don't think
exactly.
so.
Yeah, exactly. I think, you're really touching on, what I wrote down like the moment of transformation. Wasn't a moment necessarily, but it was a time of transformation for
Yeah.
you when you saw yourself through a different lens, you saw the experience through a different lens. And um, you know, I believe that that pain is actually what gives us access to our greater self
Mhm. Mhm.
by going through that, because it gives us more dimension, it gives us access to, because I think, in some way we all start with some bias, if you will. We always have biases that we have to temper.
Yeah.
Right. So as when you're talking about going from that period of ego, Ryan Holiday's ego is the enemy. We were talking about stoicism just before we hit
Yeah.
record
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Ryan Holiday's ego is the enemy, and then you move into empathy, forgiveness, more compassion,
Yeah.
right? Um, as you're thinking about your journey, how has that? transformation in you influenced who you've become today?
I think the biggest thing it's done. So in 2015, I was in full adrenal fatigue by the end of 2015, I was in full adrenal fatigue to the point where my testosterone was almost impossible to measure. Like
Um,
almost like every medical professional I talked to couldn't believe wasn't in the hospital.
oh,
So I was
wow.
like a sick individual, I was very
That's
sick
severe. Yeah.
and had, and when people say, oh, I'm burned out, I'm like, not, there's different levels of burned out, let me
Hmm.
tell you.
Hmm.
And the reality was is that I had to rebuild myself. And that transformation, like what it informed was just we are primal beings. We are human beings and we can't escape it. Most of what we do fulfills a primal need that's based off of a human body and brain that's designed for hunting and gathering,
Hmm.
And my perspective on psychological safety, for example, is informed by that perspective of being in adrenal fatigue and having to recover my body, for example. Because,
Right.
if you wake up in the morning with the sun
Hmm.
and go for a walk and get the sunlight in your eyes and you go to bed with the sun and like how many nuts should you eat? And the answer is at the pace that it takes to crack them, find them, crack them, and like eat a handful of them because you're never going to carry much more than that, right? But it's not just the amount, it's the pacing
Right.
at which you should eat them, right? So there's like a primal function to that,
Mm.
and all, why should you eat gristle? It's good for your jaw, it's good for your posture, it's good for like there's so many things connected to the primal self. And I think the psychological safety is too. And the metaphor that I often use is for the reason why we crave meaning, for example, and being valued by others is if you were living in a cave with a community, your primary concern is ensuring that that cave sees you as valuable. Because if you're not valuable, it's a
Yeah,
terrifying world,
that's right.
right? So
Yeah.
we need feedback, we need appreciation, we need acknowledgement, and our brain starts triggering all kinds of chemical functions as a result of that build community, that build connection, that build meaning, that help us think through problems better and more effectively. All of this is primal. None of this is something that we get to argue away. It's like it's inarguable, these kinds of primal functions. So
Hmm.
that's a long-winded version of saying like my transition from through various points in my life has informed me what my dad said to me 30 years ago, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs is old, but so is gravity. You can't escape these things. So you
Hmm.
might as well learn how to leverage them.
Our fathers may have been the same. He said something like, my dad said, don't resist nature's forces.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're stronger
yeah.
than you are.
Yeah, yeah, and
Um,
I think that's one of those things. One of the things I do miss about that time in my life was this intimate relationship daily with nature,
mm,
and
yeah, for sure.
that connection is something I muse about often and wish was more often.
I can hear that and I can see that. I can see you went to a different place. What is it about that connection that's so meaningful for you, Neil?
Hmm. I think it's the most honest relationship I've had in my life.
What do you mean by that? What does honest mean?
Um, I think a relationship with nature is completely unadulterated by perspective. It just is. There's
Mm.
no pretense. There's no context. It just is. And I think that's yeah, I think that's sort of where I land about that. I mean, I'm a certified horticulturalist, so
Mhm. One of your many entrepreneurial ventures.
I mean, this is so I kind of have this connection with Mother Nature, I guess you'd say that I do appreciate, but I step away from it because I think that what I'm able to offer in the work that I do is to a degree more important than my needs. So I fulfill just enough of my needs so that I can enable other people to have their needs met. And I think that that's ultimately what I am here to do.
Exponential
It's okay.
impact. It's
Yeah.
exponential impact. Yeah. I
Yeah.
am curious. I mean, as you know, I specialize in differentiation in services. So I've got, my brain's rattling around up there for the moment. And I help people understand their remarkable value so that they can differentiate and then create remarkable results,
Sure, sure.
in services especially. But what I'm wondering about is it seems to me that nature and the work that you do are actually quite nicely aligned. And I'm wondering, do you currently somehow blend those two for the benefit of not just yourself, but also, and even more so, the teams and the companies that you work with?
I don't. There's been a lot of talk about it. It's one of those like, there's a lot of talk but no action kind of things that will happen when it's meant to happen. But I will say this, one of my favorite interventions to offer leaders is to get on the phone and go for walks with their people. If you can't go for a walk with someone, get on the phone and say, "Hey, that one-on-one we were going to do on Zoom, I'm just going to go for a walk." And go for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually
Mm-hmm.
people will join you,
Mm-hmm.
rather physically on the walk or on the phone with you. And that change fundamentally, I've seen it more times than I can count, fundamentally change the landscape of teams.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So nature has a way of being a teacher, whether you like it or not.
So what can nature teach us as leaders or entrepreneurs in the world from your perspective?
I would say the number one thing it teaches is humility. Nature is inarguable. And I think that that is such a gift. It is such a gift. And I think that's where perspectives like, your capacity to be wrong without making yourself wrong or bad in the process, that's such a gift. And I think that comes from being in nature a lot. We used to have a saying, if when you go up into a tree, you have plan A, B, C,
Right.
and chances are you'll go with D.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can have all the plans in the world, so you have to be willing to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be willing to take in new information, incorporate it, and apply it. And that might mean that your plan has to change. And that degree of adaptability requires, and I think that is true, adaptability requires a degree of humility because you have to be able to let go of what doesn't work anymore. Nature, being in nature, exposing yourself to sort of the more challenging elements of nature puts that on the table in such a way that you can't ignore it. Or you might meet an ultimate end,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
and that becomes inarguable too at some point.
Right. So where does this there's themes here that keep coming back to this leaning in, right? We keep leaning in. I'm hearing that over and over and over again. Um, where does resilience fit in here? Is resilience the result of that leaning in? Is that something that we develop differently?
Hmm.
What's your thought on resilience um, and being in environments where maybe we aren't as safe or feeling as
Uh,
welcome?
so maybe I'll if you don't mind, I might flip
Of
the
course.
script on you a little bit and ask, what do you mean by resilience?
Good question. So when we're talking about resilience, we're thinking about like you said, the capacity to be wrong without making yourself wrong in the process.
Hmm.
To a large degree, I think that's resilience.
Hmm.
So
Sure.
if that would be an angle I would take on it, is the ability to stand in that space, and still hold your own
Yeah.
dignity, if you will. And I'm okay. I may have been wrong, but I'm okay.
Yep.
Something
Yep.
like that. Or I may have made a mistake. I may have wronged someone, but
Right.
I'm okay and I can write that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Share with me what yours might be.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the name David Goggins?
Oh, yes. Yes, you know what? I absolutely love that book. The one thing I got from it is no matter how much it hurts, you still got at least 30% more.
That's
So
right. That's right.
it doesn't matter
Yeah.
how you think you're at your limit, you got at least 30% more. I just love that book.
I mean,
Can't hurt me.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, what a great book. And what a great audiobook because he had like a podcast
Oh, I
connected to
hadn't
it.
heard the audio.
Oh yeah, the
Really?
audiobook is
Amazing.
absolutely worth it. And I think the perspective that David Goggins provides of like you do not know your capacity.
Right?
When it comes to resilience, you are exactly as resilient as you've tested yourself.
Hmm.
And frankly, people say they're burned out or they've had enough or they're tired or they're this or that, they're that long before they ever know their full potential.
Oh, yep.
Like, like, and it's honestly, it sickens and saddens me so much because
Mhm.
the potential people have within themselves that they do not access, that I don't access within myself,
Right.
and I think that is the thing that keeps me up more at night than anything else, is that I know there's more and I don't tap into it. And that knowing comes from knowing exactly how hard I can push myself. I know how far I can go. And I know that where I've seen myself go, I could have pushed her further. Like I know there's still more in that gas tank. I know how far I've gone, not what's my full potential is. That might be a better way to say it. So when
Hmm.
it comes to resilience, I think people underestimate their capacity
Hmm.
and they give up on themselves more than anything. And comfort is a killer of growth. People
Yeah.
will pursue
I
comfort.
think, yeah, I agree with you. I think we do that. I think we give up on ourselves quickly. And I also think, to your point, leading teams, I think
Mhm.
and leaders give up on people
I would
more
agree
as
with
well.
that.
Hmm.
I
Both
totally agree with
sides.
that. And I think that they do that once they've given up on themselves.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that is sort of the plight of leadership is you can only lead people to the level that you believe in them. And
Hmm.
you can only lead if you believe in yourself.
Hmm.
So I think there is a point, and I think when it comes to like feedback, giving people feedback, for example, we hear it from people all the time. We had a session today where we were, training a bunch of leaders on feedback, and it's like, what holds you back from giving feedback? It's like, how I'm getting perceived. Is it going to land? Are they going to be
Hmm.
offended?
Yeah.
They're asking all the same questions that everybody else is asking. These are like senior people that have been doing this for like 25, 30 years at
Right.
executive level. They're not new to the game and they're asking the same questions, so
Yeah. Yeah, and
that,
those questions have been around for a very long time. So I mean, this is what you do. You transform and you tap into this potential. Share with us a favorite story, somewhere where you've seen that transformation in a leader that has been, to your point, you did the numbers, either lit you up like a firecracker because it had so much meaning and so much exponential impact, or story that jumps out for you.
oh yeah. Okay. So there's a few from some training programs that we run. We have our sort of flagship program is one called the Courageous Leader Program.
Okay.
And I think psychological safety and accountability come together to build learning. But what is on a balance beam together is psychological safety, courage, and grace. And like
Mm.
courage sits between those two. And so there's lots coming to mind from that. But one of my favorite ones was actually a one-on-one client that I have, which I don't do a ton of one-on-one coaching anymore. I always keep sort of a roster of like 3 to 5 clients on the go.
Hmm.
Maybe a couple more now and again. But I had a leader recently, a senior guy, he went from chief strategy officer of a pretty large media organization to CEO role.
Hmm.
And his number one priority was this large digital transformation initiative. And he's like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And there he was at like nobody in the organization would have guessed he was saying that to
Right.
anybody. And we talked extensively about the difference between creating a team that was organized around execution and creating a team that was organized around learning
Hmm.
and diverse perspectives and things like that. And that was really the orientation of the coaching for about 6 months.
Hmm.
And really it was this change from I don't know how I'm going to do this to it's not about what I do, it's who I do it with.
Right.
And that transformation led to the formulation of a team. Their goal was to complete the project within 18 months. And the previous CEO had wanted to do this in 5 years. So he was very aggressive, and they got it done in less than a year.
Wow.
So the potential that was accessed because
Hmm.
he committed to a process of, and like I didn't have to do any of the work. It was just like someone saying, you have permission to do it in the way that feels right for you.
Hmm.
And what he was able to accomplish was really amazing and fundamentally change, engagement scores, productivity, wellness, all this sort of stuff. You get all these like organizational metrics. But I would say of all the conversations I've had, I think that one fundamentally changed the culture of that organization more rapidly and more significantly than any other single project I've been a part of.
Beautiful. And what stood out for you as so meaningful for you?
That it worked. No, I mean, I fundamentally believe that workplaces can be a place where people go home happier than when they arrive. Like work, like I love my work.
Hmm.
I like who I do it with. I like
Hmm.
why I do it.
Hmm.
And that does not mean there's not moments where it's hard. It doesn't mean that there was moments where I didn't think it was going to work. It doesn't mean that any of the bad didn't exist. It means that I believed that it was possible and I was in a dogged pursuit of that ultimate goal. And I think that's possible for people. It doesn't have to be so hard. It can be really good, and I believe that for people. And I think in that scenario, more people were going home feeling empowered and enlivened from their workplace than in any other context I'd worked in and in any other context where I had influence.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it really is a testament to his courage, not
Yeah.
my coaching, his courage.
Yeah. Well, it's true, I think, when the courage is such a huge part of it, right?
Yeah.
And that there's no accessing potential without courage. You can't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. And the real challenge with courage is if you're right, it's courage, and if it's wrong, it's stupidity.
Or it can
So
appear so.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it can be it can be misguided too, and I think that's the challenge with courage is that you have to have this trust that it was worth it.
And who has to have that trust?
I think the person putting their courage, their reputation on the line, I
Mm.
think that's what matters. Yeah,
You
yeah,
seem reflective. I feel like there's something else that's in there that.
yeah, it just makes me. Yeah, I mean, like the work that I do has been very meaningful for me for a long time, and it comes from this desire to provide for that younger version of myself that couldn't get it right and didn't have any guidance. And I think that the chronic undertraining of leaders leads to more like distress.
Mhm.
It leads to people going, so what is resilience and how do we give people it? And like
Mhm.
that conversation exists, I think, more
Mhm.
because of chronic undertraining for leaders than any other
Well, it's a
thing.
big theme out there right now, resilience.
Yeah.
So, coming from here today now, Neil today, what would you say to your younger self?
Uh, ease up. It's okay. You're not going to prove any more by going as hard as you're going. You can prove as much or more without the cost. It doesn't have to cost so much. That's really what I would say to myself. Yeah. I mean, I have 3 fractures in my spine that are there, and I never missed a day of work.
Okay, so let's flip that. That's got to have been painful. That might have been the pain you were talking about.
Well, that was some of
Mm,
it.
for sure. What would you want if you were to say that to your younger self? What would you want your younger self to hear that maybe they weren't hearing
Um,
from that message? What's the wisdom?
that there was nothing to prove to begin with, and that, just existing is proof enough. You don't
Okay.
have to prove anything to anybody. And I think that's when you're in your 20s. When I was in my 20s, I was trying to prove myself to someone who, you know, wasn't listening, didn't
Hmm.
exist. It was this sort of imagined, person that would
Yeah.
somehow approve of me. And I think when you're in that kind of game, it's hard to see. But that's what I would have wanted myself to see, is that, I didn't have anything to prove. I could have done a lot more good, and gotten just as much work done, you know,
What?
without being so hard on myself or the people
Yeah,
around me.
that's true. Yeah, I think a lot of us would align with that or appreciate that. What do you think your younger self, what would have allowed your younger self to hear that message, do you think?
Oh, I don't think anything. I don't think anything would have worked. I think I needed that. I think, uh, when you're the youngest of 3 siblings,
Mm,
and some of the stuff that happened in the home and some of the stuff that happened around my family dynamics and stuff like that, and some of the things that were some of the messages that I received, whether they were intended or not, some of the messages that I received was that I had something to prove. So I spent my 20s trying to prove that I was tough enough, strong enough,
hmm.
fast enough, all those kinds of things. And I don't think there's one thing that would have changed that internal narrative. It was time. It was realizing that I wasn't willing to pay that price anymore for the outcomes I wanted. Um, and the closest that I'll say ever came was when my physical body finally said enough is enough. You
Yeah.
can't be doing this anymore. I had to figure out how to get paid to think for a living and offer my perspective for a living. And what shifted that was a question from a gentleman who mentored me for many, many, many years. He said he was asking about how I spoke to myself, and I shared that. And he said, "Would you say it to your daughter?" And it crushed me. It absolutely crushed me. I remember my desk was facing that way back then,
Mm,
and I
hmm.
remember like literally getting weak in the knees and sort of collapsing to the ground because I was on the phone like with my earbuds, and I just remember sitting on the ground and just going like, man, oh man, like that. You're saying that other people don't talk to themselves like that? You got to be kidding me. And that kind of realization, that was the closest to that moment. But that moment would have had no meaning without the pain that preceded it.
Mm,
So I needed that to have that break. Um, and that was really the moment that sent me down this path. It was like, okay,
right.
what good could I do? What mark could I leave if the question was less about how am I talking to myself and more about what am I offering to others?
Right. And I think to your point, um, the wisdom isn't available until the pain is experienced,
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Like the problem is the way. Back to stoicism, right? It's like the problem is the way, and you're the challenges that I faced became the way that I connect with leaders, with people, and that, I mean, I haven't talked about this in a long time. You definitely
Good.
tapping into some old stuff, but like it was it. it served then and it serves now,
Yeah.
because of the degree of humbling effect. I got humbled big time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, Mother nature teaches, life teaches. And I think if you're willing to take the lessons, you know, you maybe get humbled a little less often. Um,
Mm.
but and I think that, it doesn't mean that I don't get humbled now and again. But
Well, that's healthy.
but it's healthy, right? But it's
Yeah.
like, but now the lessons come easier because I'm not fighting so hard. And another statement from a mentor sticks out actually, which is, everybody fights so hard to hold on to the mud, and they thrash and they fight and they try to claw their way out of the muck, and they often don't realize that if they just let go, they would find their feet on the ground and they can look at the sky instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when we talk about resilience, I
Mm-hmm.
think it has more to do with your capacity to let go than your capacity to fight harder.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when someone like David Goggins talks, it sounds all about fighting harder, but it's
It
like
does.
actually what he's doing is letting go of his beliefs that he can't,
Yeah,
you know?
I agreed. And I think that's a piece of the wisdom, like with time, right? What we learn is that the pain, the moments of learning will always be there. Moments that humble us will always be there. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's not about that they get easier, it's just that we learn faster. That
Yeah.
we know to recognize them. And the faster we can do that, the
Mm.
more we can extract from that and allow for those to happen, more
Yeah.
likely we are going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a permission aspect to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that younger version of me drew no quarter. There was no permission
Mm-hmm.
to let anything go. And that's exactly what happened. And I suffered all the consequences of it as a result. And
Metaphorically and physically, I'm assuming.
you know
Is
it.
that,
Yeah,
yeah.
you know it. Yeah.
Mm,
And I think now there's more of a like, I'm getting better at giving myself permission to be
mm,
imperfect, to be wrong, to make error. And I think that that does nothing but serve resilience. Um, because if you don't do that, you literally just holding too many balls in the air. A friend of mine, a colleague, and someone who I respect very highly. She's an executive director of a circus school that I'm actually part of, and you know, she's like, I can't handle the workload. And we talked lots about prioritizing and things like that. And here, this person is someone who I respect so deeply. And what are
mm-hmm,
we talking about? What can you let go of? What can
mm-hmm.
you say no? And it wasn't what can you say no to, it's what can you let go
And she runs a circus school. There's a lot of letting go there, physical
of?
letting go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm a director
Hmm.
there, and I mean it's just, and like I've been a stage rigger and
Wow.
worked as a stage manager and things like that, and you learn. I think that world you learn what's worth letting go of pretty quickly.
Yep, exactly. Well, it's interesting. I mean, we're just to wind us up, but the idea of this metaphorical and physical, the lessons show up. I believe
Yeah,
that typically the lessons show up metaphorically first. They show, they don't really hurt a lot,
yeah,
but they show up quietly
yeah,
and they get more and more pronounced. And ultimately they become physical experiences in one form or another.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think that as we start becoming more aware, and I really, I just want to honor your humanity. You're so deeply in touch. I saw so much of you in there, the richness of you in there, and all the untapped potential of the people you're wanting to help and for yourself. There was a moment where you became, I loved that moment where you just went in and your humanity
yeah.
showed up. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Um, but we've talked about a lot, and I think that the themes that just keep coming back are there's a deep honor you hold from my perspective, if I can feed back to you. that would be okay. You hold courage and this idea of where the lessons come from, the pain, you hold those in deep regard. Is that an accurate statement?
Uh, I would say I would say that's an accurate statement. I do hold them in deep regard. I have the life that I have, which I am exceedingly grateful for,
Mhm.
because of those lessons. And what's interesting, and this is, uh, leadership is a tough job. And I've said before that all of the greatest moments of sort of psychological pain, anxiety, pain in my heart, and all the greatest most rewarding moments have all been connected to leadership. It provides this breadth of experience that very few things, frankly, other than my time in nature, has provided the same kind of breadth.
Interesting. Mm.
And I have a reverence and a gratitude for those experiences. And I think, and I was sharing this earlier today, actually, you know, gratitude and graciousness have the same root word in grace.
Mhm.
And the fundamental feature of grace is that it is undeserved.
Mhm.
Undeserved latitude is the definition of grace. So to receive something graciously or to be grateful, fundamentally, at some level, we also have to agree that it may or may not be deserved, but we're recognizing it anyways. And I think that's what I continue to try to remind myself of, is that these experiences have created the potential to work with leaders from around the globe to try to impact people. Literally, the only continent that I haven't worked on is Antarctica. Anybody knows anybody? I'm
There we go. The ask has been
shooting for
placed.
all of them. That's my aspirational is to work on Antarctica. But like that is something that I could have never told that 22 or 23-year-old kid,
Wow.
or 19-year-old kid, hey, this is what all this pain and all this that you're going through right now, that's the potential that you're going to have, that you're going to be able to tap into. So I'm grateful for the journey because without that, there is no this.
Yeah, which is what we see in hindsight, right?
Indeed.
We can be grateful because we can see where it's going. And in the moment, to your point earlier, trusting
Yeah.
that that will reveal itself and it's all going to work out and letting go
Indeed.
and knowing it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah, so that you can come back at the end and go, yeah, you know what? It was. It
Yeah,
all worked
that's right.
out.
That's right. Yeah.
Didn't
Yeah.
go as I planned it would go, but it
Yeah.
all worked out. As most of us have seen that in one form or another, right? It's like, oh, I came out okay on the other side, but didn't go anything like I thought it was going to
Yeah,
go.
yeah, totally. I mean, kind of like this conversation, right? It's like I'm the like safety guy, and I do this, and it's like, okay, we're going to talk about like, something completely different, and it's, I think it's good to be open to those things, and sometimes they create beautiful experiences that are great. So,
Thank you for playing with me.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for
It's been
having
a
me.
joyful and joyful expression of, you entered into a life of curiosity here. So I appreciate your you're
Indeed.
showing that curiosity and sharing so vulnerably with us. And it's just been a great conversation. Before we finish up, Neil, can you let everybody know how can they best get in touch with you and where would the best place be to reach you?
LinkedIn that's really the only platform that I'm active on. And the website. So Neil Pretty on LinkedIn. There's not a whole lot of Neil Pretties. I think there's one guy who's an architect in the UK. I'm not that guy.
Makes it it's kind of like Michelle Sorgaroli. There's not too many of us.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
first you
That's
got to figure
right.
out how to spell it.
Yeah, yeah,
LinkedIn,
yeah. Pretty is actually the way it sounds, though. So that
you're in
one's
good shape.
yeah,
Easy to
yeah. So that
find.
that one's an
Easy to
easy one.
find. Amazing.
And then the website, AristotlePerformance.com. That's
Beautiful.
the vehicle through which we make all the change we can happen. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and sharing with us how you are creating exponential growth on your journey for
Thank you very
others.
much. I
It's been
really
such a
appreciate it.
delight. Thanks,
Wonderful.
Neil.
Thanks,
All
Michelle.
right. Bye for now.